All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Caitlin Coleman. I'm Water Education Colorado's editor of Headwaters Magazine, and I'm here with our executive director, Jayla Poppleton. Thanks for joining us for today's sold-out webinar focusing on the latest in demand management in Colorado. The webinar complements and expands on the content in our fall 2019 issue of Headwaters Magazine, which you can see on your screen, and I sent out the link to you, but you can also find it on our website at watereducationcolorado.org. The magazine kind of more broadly focuses on drought contingency planning. Well,
yes, welcome everybody. We're so glad to have you here and to be able to gather and host virtual events like this during these times of social distancing when so many other things are on hold. Like I'm sure you all have as well, at WECO, we've had to rearrange and rethink numerous planned events. It's hard to believe, for instance, that tonight was supposed to be our president's reception, which is our big annual fundraiser and awards banquet. So we would have been out there with you toasting this past year's work and the accomplishments of our award recipients, one of whom is one of today's presenters, with custom cocktails on the sunny back patio of Balustrade Vineyards here in Denver. But instead, this exciting event has been pushed back to September, and we hope that we'll be able to move forward with it then and that many of you will join us. So we're all adapting, and at WECO, we're staying the course and working hard to keep serving you and others across Colorado to keep you informed and to help build your water knowledge from a distance. So I'm so glad to see the turnout today for this important update on the state's demand management scoping work. And I want to thank the Colorado Water Conservation Board not only for presenting today, but also for providing funding support for this program. And I want to thank all of you who are members of Water Education Colorado. We rely on your support year-round to continue delivering our programs and expanding our reach. And we are especially grateful during this time of uncertainty. So if you're not a member, I strongly encourage you to consider joining. It's a fantastic community with many great opportunities to learn and connect. And you can find all the information about how to sign up on our website. So with that, I will turn it back over to Caitlin to get us started.
Thanks. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. The webinar will last for an hour and 15 minutes. As attendees, you'll be muted throughout the whole presentation, but if you have questions, you can just type them into the questions pane in your GoToWebinar toolbar, which should be at the side of your screen or maybe at the top or bottom. We're aiming to leave at least 15 minutes at the end of our presentation for our panelists to respond to questions. And after we finish, there should be some survey questions that pop up as you're exiting the webinar. There's only, I think, 4 of them, so please take just a minute, provide us with your feedback. Also note that the webinar is being recorded. We'll send out a link to you hopefully on Monday. And I think those are all the housekeeping notes, so let's get started. Under Colorado's Drought Contingency Plan, the Colorado Drought Contingency Plan, signed in May last year, Colorado and its neighboring upper Colorado River Basin states of New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming were granted the ability to bank conserved water in Lake Powell and other upper basin reservoirs in case of a future crisis, but only if all the states agree on an upper basin demand management program. Here in Colorado, as you guys know, work groups and the Interbasin Compact Committee are exploring the idea and questions around demand management through a work plan process that the Colorado Water Conservation Board developed last spring. But there is still lots of unanswered questions around demand management. Today, we're going to hear from our 4 panelists who are deeply involved in this work. We'll start off by hearing from Amy Ostdiek from the Interstate and Federal section at the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Then we'll hear from Paul Bruchez at Reeder Creek Ranch. We'll then move into a discussion looking at equity and some bigger questions around demand management, where we'll hear from Kyle Whitaker with Northern Water and Mark Harris with the Grand Valley Water Users Association. And then finally, we'll wrap up by answering some of your questions. So let's start with Amy, who will help us understand what demand management is, how Colorado is exploring demand management, and she'll fill us in on some recent events, discussions, and themes that have emerged. So Amy, you're all
All right. Well, thank you so much, Caitlin and Jayla, for setting this up. I'm happy to be here today to talk a little bit about demand management. And my goal today really is to provide an update on what we've been doing with the demand management feasibility investigation in Colorado. But I thought it would be beneficial to first provide a little bit of context and talk about what demand management is and why we're talking about it. So to start, when we talk about demand management, what we're talking about is the concept of reductions in consumptive use on a temporary, voluntary, and compensated basis. So when we're thinking about demand management, really what we're contemplating here is a potential program where people, if they choose to participate, and that obviously would be a choice, would be paid to use less water on a temporary basis. And these participants would only presumably choose to participate if it makes sense for them and their operations at the time. So the reason that we're talking about demand management is because it was set up with a demand management storage agreement, which is part of the drought contingency plan. This is a suite of agreements among the 7 Colorado River Basin states. And I'm not really going to go into the details on the various elements of the DCP, but the important element for today's purposes is the demand management storage agreement. And what this does is it sets up the opportunity and the authorization for the upper division states to store water in Lake Powell, if and only if the upper division states agree that a demand management program would be feasible and advisable in the upper basin. I just want to be clear here that this does not set up any kind of obligation to use this storage space. If the upper division states don't agree that it would be feasible and advisable and find a way to make it work, then that storage space goes unused. Another point that I want to make here is that if we do set up a demand management program and we set up that storage pool, that water could only be released at the direction of the Upper Colorado River Commission for compact compliance purposes. So this would not be an effort to create additional water for use. Rather, it would only go towards that compact compliance. So to back up a little bit, why are we even talking about demand management? I think that's an important question to consider. And really it's because, as many of us know, we have faced about 20 years of really challenging hydrology in the Colorado Basin. Now, the upper division states have a non-depletion obligation to the lower basin states pursuant to the terms of a 1922 compact. Again, I'm not going to get into the terms of that. And I just want to say, though, that the upper division states have never been out of compliance with the compact. But given how challenging the hydrology has been, and given that we are looking at a future of uncertain hydrology, and the fear that that hydrology could continue, we believe that it makes most sense to talk about potential proactive solutions to avoiding a curtailment. When we think about a potential curtailment and what it could look like and what it could mean for the state, it would likely mean extensive litigation, uncertainty, and really a high risk to a lot of our water users. So we want to at least have the opportunity to think about ways to avoid that, given the challenging hydrology that we've seen. So that all makes sense, and that's great, but when you think about what it would actually take to set up a demand management program, there are a whole lot of questions that would need to be answered. And just to illustrate some of those things that would need to be figured out before we set up a demand management program, first want to make the point that we are very much in this orange box of feasibility. So at this point, we're just looking at the big threshold issues associated with the potential demand management program. Questions like, how would you come up with the funding for this scale of a program? And that's obviously a question maybe even on people's minds a little bit more now, given the current circumstances. But we'd also have to figure out, for example, how to get that water to Lake Powell. We would need to figure out how to verify and account for that water. So a lot of things would need to get figured out, but that's really just the threshold analysis of feasibility that we're in. And every upper division state is going through a similar analysis at this point. So if and only if all of the states, including Colorado, determine that it would be feasible to set up a demand management program, we then would actually have to go through the difficult work of setting that program up. And the demand management storage agreement sets out some minimum requirements for setting that up, things like figuring out how the water is stored and released. And then we would have to reach agreement with the Secretary of Interior on some key elements. And one thing to consider here as well is that, you know, if we were to have the opportunity to store demand management water in Lake Powell, what that would really be doing is giving the upper division states the ability to store water that otherwise, if not for the storage agreement, would have been released to the lower basin states. So the lower basin states have a role in consulting. We need to consult with the lower basin states before we actually set up this program. As you can imagine, they will have some thoughts and some interest in how we're accounting for all that water. So we would have to go through all of that before actually going through that final round of agreements and setting up the program. So like I said, all of the upper division states are currently in their own feasibility investigations, and every upper division state would have to agree that it's feasible before we move forward. But I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk about what we're doing in Colorado with our feasibility investigation. So our work is being guided by the 2019 work plan that the CWCB board adopted nearly a year ago now, which seems kind of crazy to me. At any rate, there are 3 elements of this work plan: work groups, workshops, and continued education and outreach. And really the aim here and the goal has been to, excuse me, to begin thinking about the big threshold issues associated with the demand management program. We are not asking them to solve these problems. We are not asking them to give us the solutions to all these problems, but just to start at the beginning and really brainstorm about these big questions that would need to be answered. So we are, like I said, several months into this, and of course the current circumstances have impacted how we're doing our work here. But it's been great to see how many of the work groups have actually moved pretty seamlessly to web-based meetings. A lot of the work groups are actually meeting more frequently. And they're really beginning to think about, you know, how do we want to capture the work that we've done? How do we want to summarize the information that we've gathered throughout this? So I want to provide just a quick update on some of the common themes that are arising at this point in the feasibility investigation. Like I said, we really gave the work groups the task of starting at the beginning and just tackling these threshold issues. And we wanted to give them room, particularly in their initial meetings, to just sit down and talk through things. But they're starting to get to a point where there are some common issues that are rising to the top. And some of our other speakers, I think, are going to dig into these a little bit more deeply. The first one I'll address is equity. So under the 2019 work plan, the board directed us to study demand management in a way that would not risk, you know, creating adverse impacts to one particular sector of the state. There are a lot of different ways to think about equity. And I think that we still have a lot of work to do in figuring out what it actually means and how it would be implemented if we were to set up a demand management program, because of course it would be a voluntary program. So I think there are some issues yet to be tackled there, and the IVCC has really helped us start to think about some of those issues. Another common theme is framing for the discussion. So, you know, I think that a lot of work groups got to a point in their discussions where they felt like they wanted just some kind of straw man or hypothetical or some framework for beginning this discussion so that they could talk through the concrete elements of what may work or what may not work for demand management. So a lot of the work groups have been doing that and trying to, again, think towards the future and think towards how they want to capture all the hard work they've been doing and figuring out what kind of framework makes sense in that context. Another big theme that has arisen is, you know, there's been a lot of work already done on these types of issues, on voluntary, temporary, compensated reductions in consumptive use. So a lot of the work groups have started by really looking at the existing universe of knowledge, but we've also identified some data gaps, some areas where further study might be beneficial. And in some cases, I think that further study really comes down to on-the-ground research and on-the-ground projects. Now, we can't use the current funding source we have for pilot projects, but that's not to say that there aren't other sources of funding to start analyzing those data gaps. And I think that Paul's going to dig into that a little bit more on his efforts. And finally, a lot of work groups identified some cross-cutting issues that really are issues that span multiple work groups or touch on the work of other work groups. And a lot of them express the desire to talk to each other a little bit more and work through some of these issues together. And to that end, and really to provide a forum to talk about all of these issues, we had a joint meeting with IBCC in March, and that's what this picture is of, March 4th and 5th. And I think we were really happy with how that went. I think we made a lot of progress in discussing some of these themes. So that brings us to the next steps of all of this. The work groups, like I said, are continuing to meet, and they will continue to meet. We're hoping that they are close to a pens down point within the next month or so. Meanwhile, we have consultants who are getting to work on a literature review for us, and they will also help us frame up some of the additional data gaps that are still out there. But what we're planning to do is go to the board in July, the CWCB board, and report all of this and seek some guidance on next steps. And we anticipate that guidance, or that the guidance we get may focus on potentially some of these open questions that are still yet to be addressed. And that's all to say, we're not expecting to have an answer to the question of feasibility in July. We think that there are still a lot of things that we need to think through before we get there. And the other thing to remember is that the other upper division states are also in the midst of their own feasibility investigations. And Colorado, I think, got quite a bit of a head start on this. So it may be beneficial to see what the other states are doing and how we might incorporate that information into our studies. Excuse me. So I think that's about all I have for today. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Amy. So next up, we have Paul Bruchez with Reeder Creek Ranch, who'll share his perspective as a work group member, and he'll discuss an upcoming pilot project funded through an ATM grant that might shed some light on demand management feasibility.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I hope that my screen is showing correctly, as I'm new to this.
We can see your screen. If you want to share your camera, that's not showing yet, but either way.
My apologies. Are we go now?
Yeah.
And thanks for everybody for attending today. It's an honor and a privilege to be here discussing this topic. I think that Amy did a great job of starting this off based on kind of my role in conversation here. I was asked to kind of speak to the perspective of the process and progress in the eyes of the IBCC and the demand management work groups. So I started as ag rep to the Colorado Basin Roundtable. I was appointed to the IBCC, and then I participated in the Ag Impacts work group to demand management. So I think that really the thing that I was supposed to kick this off with as far as process really directly leads to the project that we are currently working on. And so I think the two storylines fall well together. The Colorado Basin Roundtable formed a demand management work group dating back to January of 2019. That is chaired by Kirsten Carruth and participated in heavily by many roundtable members. I think initially, you know, we formed a list of questions and concerns associated with demand management and opportunities, I should add. We involved Dr. Perry Cabot from a very early time, a research scientist with Colorado State University. And I think that Perry had some pretty common themes as far as some research gaps associated with higher altitude, perennial irrigation, and conserved consumptive use dialogue. And so that was going on prior to the first meeting of the Ag Impacts work group, which occurred on August 8th of 2019. The Ag Impacts work group ended up coming up with a relatively similar list to the Colorado Basin Roundtable, and many of those things surrounded some of the higher altitude research questions that Dr. Cabot had addressed initially back in April of 2019. So with that, our second Ag Impacts work group meeting occurred in early November 2019, and I think we all got together and said that if Dr. Cabot has these questions and we know we have some research gaps, no more for or against demand management, but that we felt that science and data could help best answer some of the questions that we all had. And so we started spinning our wheels about how we could get there. We approached the Colorado Basin Roundtable with the concept that they could actually go for an ATM grant through the Colorado Water Conservation Board to look at evaluating some of the science. And so within the Ag Impacts work group, my family ranches just outside of Kremlin, Colorado. So we are the higher altitude perennial irrigators that Dr. Cabot had in question. And so it was kicked to me to see if I could find some neighbors and other people who would be interested in participating. And I'm sorry, my screen just changed. I'm so sorry, Caitlin, am I still on?
You're still on. We can see your inbox right now, but your presentation is behind it.
Well, that's not great. You guys can check my emails for me later. So with that, I started some dialogue with some neighbors up here about putting together some acreage. And one of the key things for Dr. Cabot was to do a project that would be at scale and something that could possibly be duplicated based on research needs. And so my presentation is nothing more than some photographs, but I felt that photographs would be important to everybody locked in at home, but also to show the lay of the land up here in Kremlin. So many of these producers, when we went through the early drought of the 2000s, I think this is something on why they were so willing to participate, is that we've seen river conditions up here in the headwaters be pretty bleak in the past. And so I think we can all identify as a group of producers what water shortage means dating back to that drought. I had to show some of the characters in this because they're real people and not just hypothetical, but these were two of the first people that I approached to be in this. I've worked closely with them over time. And in the beginning of this pilot project related to data and research, it was more of almost a favor to ask of my friends for purposes of science to be willing to participate at what seemed to be at the time a little bit of an odd concept. But these two are very involved in water matters. They know they have got children and grandchildren they want to see grow up in agriculture and have the opportunity to do so. So with the storyline on how it goes, we found a decent amount of acreage pretty quick to kick into Dr. Cabot's program. We approached the CWCB for some assistance and ideas, ultimately applied for an ATM grant through the Colorado Basin Roundtable. Trout Unlimited is the fiscal agent for that grant. It is partnered with the Nature Conservancy and American Rivers. And the grant was awarded by the Colorado Water Conservation Board on March 11th for $500,000 for us to move forward with the project. The project has a total budget of $900,000. And while I am not a research scientist, I have a list of notes here prepared by Dr. Cabot that speak to some of the research needs that he really wants. We wanted to set a priority on evaluating the potential of water conservation and agronomic viability for reducing irrigation on high altitude irrigated pasture, and better understanding the factors involved in determining and participating payments for reducing water use. The project is a collaboration among a representative group of stakeholders from agriculture and environmental sectors. The multi-university research team includes experts in remote sensing, field instrumentation, forage sciences, and agricultural business. It also builds on past work of the successful system conservation pilot program, And I should point out too that along with Colorado State University, the multi-university includes Utah State University. The total research budget for this project is $275,000. The majority of the budget is dedicated to equipment. So the project has 6 main research goals with 2 to 3 dominating goals. And the dominating goals for Dr. Cabot is to use different remote sensing approaches to estimate consumptive use and conserve consumptive use on large 1,000-acre plus parcel of irrigated high elevation pastures characterized by diversity of ecological and biophysical conditions. The second dominant goal is to validate several remote sensing based evapotranspiration estimate models as a means of consumptive use and conserved consumptive use verification across broad spatial areas. And so that's a mouthful coming from a research scientist communicated from a rancher, but these goals in the project really are to test a lot of different theories, test a lot of different ways of measuring consumptive use and conserved consumptive use. The project changed drastically with the board vote on March 11th, was not very long before kind of the COVID-19 lockdown. And so we have all producers under contract at this time, which I'm incredibly proud of. We've had mostly remote meetings to this point. We have been able to get out in the field respecting certainly social distancing boundaries to evaluate all this. And I think we have a really exciting program. Dr. Cabot will be here next week to install all of the remote sensing equipment. We already have field techs under contract that are familiar with the lay of the land in the area to assist Dr. Cabot with his needs and streamline process. And I think that this is a really great opportunity for higher altitude irrigators to get involved with the project. And for me personally, it's been pretty fascinating to go through this process. I think I've sat through some form of conserved consumptive use or demand management meetings for a minimum of 4 years. But really, until we actually started planning a project on the ground, started actually looking at ditches that would be off, impacts to neighbors upstream and downstream, return flow water from upstream neighbors, carrying capacity of ag producers and how they could participate in a program without decreasing carrying capacity of livestock. All of these details, timing of payment, how much hay could be stored over from last year to this season to assist in feeding livestock. All of these details that I feel like in meetings at 30,000 foot views are pretty tough to put in the books, but from a planning process over the last couple of months, it's been absolutely fascinating and rewarding, and it's been an honor to work with such a great group of people. The management team for this project has been outstanding. I think that, like I said, even through the COVID-19, we're very excited that this project is going to be happening to answer some of these research questions in the field. There also has been a really interesting component to this as far as some of the social aspects. Certainly, COVID-19 plays a big role in that, but there's many other things that I've learned during this process with different purposes and reasons why producers are interested in participating. I think all at this point in time, feel pretty strongly. We were able to connect with a gentleman that's very well respected, that I think these producers see this kind of a project in the capacity that if there is water, if there is a water shortage, if we are short on water supply, with what agriculture uses within this, that we owe it to ourselves to be involved in this process. And whatever we look to label, and I think Amy framed this well, and to make clear that our project is not a demand management project. There is not a demand management program. We are no more for or against it. We're interested in understanding the data and the science about water conservation, to higher altitude irrigation. And we're interested in being involved in how this plays, potentially a larger role in the state in years to come, depending on need. But I think that for the irrigators, while a lot of the conserved consumptive use is a priority for Dr. Cabot and research, I think for the ag producers, it's really building back to production that has kind of piqued their interest. So going through some form of treatment, which I failed to mention within the project, we have 950 acres approximately of full season curtailment occurring, and then an additional 160 acres of split season irrigation. So irrigators will be having water on until June 15th, and then June 15th is the cutoff date for no more irrigation for the season. Dr. Cabot will be studying both, and I'm sorry I failed to mention that in the beginning. But going from those treatment conditions of the field to looking at residual impacts in the next years to come, I think that for these ag producers, we talk about sustainable, productive agriculture all the time, and we started throwing the word profitable. So sustainable, productive, profitable agriculture. And I think that as far as we look at this, to what has traditionally been done with water, we're excited to see with modern science and a proper team, how we might be able to move forward thinking about this in a different capacity. None of these people are going to be shutting water off and playing golf for the summer season. We'll be very involved in understanding our fields, what forages are out there, what forages perhaps are better for drought resiliency, which crop types struggle to come back, especially after a season of full curtailment. We'll be looking at impacts to return flows, certainly is on everyone's mind. And I think we have a fascinating project. We've attempted overlap with as many demand management work groups as possible, and the team is currently continuing to reach out. We're trying to check as many boxes as humanly possible, although we did contemplate that Dr. Cabot's research was reason enough to do the project. And part of my presentation here that's poor, really just beyond giving a lay of the land. Most of us are cow-calf producers, and some scenery to what our land looks like and how this impacts our life. But I'm very proud of this group of producers that have been willing to forge ahead. I hope that we'll be answering questions for the Colorado Basin Roundtable and the Ag Impacts Work Group, along with many that can assist state process through this project of evaluating conserved consumptive use in the Upper Colorado River. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Caitlin.
All right, thanks, Paul. Some interesting research coming up, and thanks for sharing your insights and beautiful photos. So Amy gave us some insight into the idea of equity earlier. Our last two speakers will kind of speak a little bit more about that and help us define what equity means. So first we're going to hear from Kyle Whitaker with Northern Water. So Kyle, right now you're muted and we can't see your camera, but we can see your screen.
Okay, well, it's probably a blessing to some of you. So I think I've got it fixed. Is that, do we have both now?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So good afternoon to everyone. And as I look down the list of people who are on this webinar today, I see so many old friends and good friends that I haven't got to see for a while, and it makes me just wish we were all in the same room today for this, and then maybe afterwards we could enjoy everyone's favorite beverage together. But I hope everyone's doing well. My name is Kyle Whitaker, and as Caitlin mentioned, I work for Northern Water. I was asked to give a little bit of perspective on myself and to give a little background of where I come from and on demand management and how it relates to me and to Northern Water. I've only been with Northern Water for a couple of years, so I'm a newbie to Northern Water, but I spent the better part of the last 20 years working for the Division of Water Resources in the Colorado River Basin. And then prior to that, I spent early in my career 5 or 6 years in water rights consulting. I'm involved with the CWCB's demand management feasibility investigation and serve on the Water Rights Administration and Accounting Work Group. I'm also on the technical committee for the Upper Colorado River Commission and been in discussions with the other Upper Basin states on demand management and the drought contingency plans. In addition to that, as most of us are, we're involved with multiple other discussions and groups, and as important as the Colorado River issues are to Northern Water, obviously this has been a topic of discussion. So with that, let's get going on what the topic at hand was. And when Caitlin and Jayla asked me to speak about equity and asked me, could you define equity? My first thought was, wow, they really do feel sorry for me, and they finally gave me something that I might could be successful on. So I decided I'd go look at the dictionary and provide a definition to equity, and the softball that they had served up for me, I could finally hit a home run. And so I went to the dictionary, looked it up, and there we have it. Equity is fair or impartial. Fairness, fair-minded, justice, equitableness, easy. And then I started thinking, well, if really the definition here is fair, what is fair? We probably need to define fair. And so I went back to, I had a football coach have a very plain, very simple, and a very delivered very bluntly definition of fair. And it went something along the lines of, if you want fair, you better have a lamb, a pig, or a steer, or you better be able to bake a darn good cake, because fair only comes around once a year. And obviously that definition of fair, and most definitions of people's of fair, it is somewhat subjective. It depends on your perspective, and what's fair to one may not be viewed as fair to others or by others. And so I went back to the dictionary and said, well, fair is tough. Fair is hard to define. So let's look at other definitions. And I found one that's, equity as it relates to shares, to business. Thought, well, that doesn't really fit with this discussion today. So I started digging around on the internet, and I found another definition, and all it said was see Rubik's Cube. And I thought, well, it's an interesting way to define fair. And I noticed here, and I'm pretty sure I found this on the internet. I had to go back and find where, but it said to see Mark, and so we'll let Mark add on to this as he comes up to our virtual podium here.
Thanks, Kyle.
And so you guys all remember the Rubik's Cube. Some can probably have better memories of it than I do. The Rubik's Cube came out, or at least made its way to rural western Colorado when I was in elementary school. I was never very good at it. I figured out a couple of ways to solve it. One was to either break the darn thing apart and put it back together with the appropriate colors in the appropriate places, or I figured out to take maybe a more logical or simpler approach and simply just peel the stickers off and strategically put them back with the same colors all on the same side. So with that divulgence of probably too much information, I'll take a minute to explain my reasoning of possibly why I would define equity in the context of demand management and equate it to a Rubik's Cube. There are, as you know, six sides of a Rubik's Cube. Similarly, there are many options and in many ways to come up with an answer of what equity might look like in demand management. By no means am I suggesting that the six that are listed here are the only concepts or areas of interest that could be considered when discussing how to develop an equitable program. These were just a few that came to mind for me when I start to think about some of the areas of interest to talk about equity. These are all, as you can see, they're related, they're intertwined, and they all present challenges. And just before I continue, I want to make it clear, this is not, and these are not the same as the work groups or the areas of interest that the feasibility study is looking at. These are distinctly different, but even though they are similar. So let's just dive into a couple. Location, for example, and if you try to approach equity in a geographically equal way, I think you risk attempting to do a little bit of conserved water. And if you take it to the extreme that you do a little bit across each and every basin or stream throughout, you end up with your costs may not be in line, the programmatic cost, the administrative difficulties of that. You turn to the local impacts. Are they there? Are they very small? And if this program is temporary, or at least the conserved water from a particular area is on a temporary basis, can are there effects? Are there impacts? Are there benefits to the environment? And if there are, could those be measured? And again, especially if it's temporary. So you can go around, and each one of these are interconnected. The cost of water, it differs by basin, by area, depending on where you're at in a basin. It can vary greatly. And then, is it practical? How do you apply a standard of practicality to this? And so you end up with this Rubik's Cube that's all diverse interests. They are scattered. They are partnered with things that don't necessarily mesh. And this is what we were dealt. But I also think that while we have a situation where things are very diverse, things are different, at the same time, I fear that there's an attempt, or will be an attempt, to create a perfect cube of equity. I don't think it's possible, and I think striving for that perfection would be a mistake. And I think striving for that perfection will probably limit us from coming up with a workable solution, a workable definition of equity. So if we break it apart, as I did to solve my Rubik's Cube, as you can see, when things are broken apart, it's very easy to get aligned next to something of similar interest, some issue of similar interest. Go to your corners, and it gets very, very hard to put that back together into a cohesive unit, a unit that can operate. Similarly, as I cheated as well and peeled the stickers off, if you peel the stickers off and you put them back in a place where it's not natural, where they don't belong, it typically is just not going to work. It's not going to function. And just as a sidebar to that, when I did peel my stickers off on my Rubik's Cube, we had a friend of mine bought the manual of how to solve those darn things, and when you peeled the stickers off, you could not solve it with the routine that was in the solve manual, because they weren't where they were supposed to be. So what do you do short of leaving it a mess, and short of solving it in whole? I think there's a lot of things in between that are very good, very workable, and define equity in a way that will be very productive. You come up with ideas, with concepts, with a package that solves some. They align very well in part, but don't try to get everyone to align. You can find similar areas of interest, of concepts that align very well and complement each other. It doesn't mean that they all have to align each and every way on each and every side. You may end up with general alignment of a few concepts, and those align well with others, and those subsets of those align well with others, but still some are not going to align very well. And sometimes we may be able to solve in whole one of the issues, one of the concepts, but find ways to align other issues and other concepts without being perfect, but aligning very well. As you can see in this Rubik's Cube analogy, there are many ways that things align and they work very well without getting to a full solution. So my definition, and it's more of a concept than it is a definition, is that we offer the same opportunity to all, but we don't guarantee that the results would be the same. And with that, we have to give it time. There's a couple of things. We have to give it time. We have to zoom out. Giving it time, it's temporary. We all agree to that. We all know that's what the program's meant to be as it relates to both individual conservation of water on individual sites, and it is temporary on the micro level, but a long-term view of the program is going to be necessary to even accomplish equity in any way. And the second one, zoom out. While we may have to look at the costs, the benefits, the impacts, and the people involved each and every day, we have to be able to pull back and look at the program on a very broad perspective to make equity work in this context. The second thing that was asked to weigh in on, and this one's easy. It was, why does equity matter? And as we know, the equity discussion is complicated, to say the least. It's important in so many ways. And, are we going to be able to come up with a model of equity or an equitable solution that not only fits everyone's needs, addresses everyone's major fears, all in a way that is acceptable and not offensive, and still accomplishes the primary reason we set out to do this? I think we can, but we may not be able to. But at the end of the day, it's about people and the relationships we have. Everyone wants to just be heard and feel that their input was heard, was considered, and inequity matters because it touches people all across this state. These are our friends, our neighbors, and as all of you know in the water world, when you start talking about neighbors in water terms, that neighborhood encompasses the entire state, north to south, west to east. So I thank you for your time, and I'm going to pass it on to Mark at this point.
All right, thanks, Kyle. We'll hear from Mark Harris, one of our neighbors on the other side of the state.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, and thank you, Whitaker, for convening this thing. And thank you, panelists. I've enjoyed the conversations we've had in putting this thing together, and I really appreciate the comments that you all have made here today. And although Kyle and I did not allude on this presentation at all, I think he really set up the conversation that I want to have And I'm going to look at it from a slightly different perspective, but it's going to use some of Kyle's comments as a point of departure. So I am Mark Karras. I'm the general manager of the Grand Valley Water Users in the Grand Valley here on the West Slope, involved in farming and other ag business and water issues since 2013, since I took this position. Water banking work group, system conservation pilot program on the Ag Impacts group with Paul and some of the others of you that are on this call today. And we too were involved with Grand Valley Water Users Conserved Consumptive Use pilot program in the years of 2017 and 2018. So as you can see, I'm broadcasting live from the global offices of Grand Valley Water Users Association, but we remain appropriately isolated socially, and some have told me that in all other possible ways as well. And these are historic times. For the first time in 115 years of the history of the association here, we held a board meeting via conference call last night, drug us grudgingly into the 21st century, and it was actually quite successful. I should begin these comments by saying that these are my personal comments. Hopefully they're informed by what we have distilled from several years of involvement with demand management, water conservation, and so on, and what we're currently hearing from our peers and associates. So if there's any good thoughts that come out of these comments, I apologize to all of you from whom I'm stealing those good ideas. The ones that are questionable, I'll take full credit for those. Kyle approached the issue of what is equity from the perspective of it being a noun, and I'm going to apologize for all of you English majors who will take exception with this, but I also want to add that there's a way to look at equity as a verb. So I'm going to suggest that equity, or the search therefore, is the process and the result by which the people in the state of Colorado balance their expressed values and attempt to productively cope with declining and volatile supply and increased demand on the Colorado River. Distribution of burden and benefit, or pain and profit if you wish, and the affordability and sustainability of any proposed plan or plans to get us to the renegotiation of the 2007 guidelines. So you can see, Kyle, you set me up really well here. Appreciate that. So that's the brief answer to what I suggest our working definition is of equity. I want to change the kind of the perspective that I use on answering the second question, which is why is this equity discussion of importance? I think Kyle did a great job of talking about some of the variety of negotiations, tensions that will have will arise. Paul has certainly done a good job in initiating those tough conversations that have to be made to really surface the right questions in his project up there. I commend him. I can personally understand the agony of the process and the delightful process as well. So why is this equity discussion of importance? Well, the political and cultural importance of recognizing and supporting the expressed values of the people of Colorado remain important. I mean, they have to be part of the discussion, and they vary, as Kyle pointed out. We also have to have realistic plans to accommodate the forecasted decline in Lakes Powell and Mead and the reasons that are causing those problems, scarcity in the river, and et cetera. And all of you that are on here know what those issues are. These discussions are and will be these solutions will be and will continue to be under discussion by all of the members of the Colorado Basin community. And if we're not there, we suffer the problems of, as one commentator last fall put it, he says, if you're not at the big table now, you won't even be able to find the small table when the decisions are made, much less find a seat. The identification of the financial, social, and environmental impacts on the affected economic and resource communities that are involved is essential. We may not be able to satisfy everyone's needs, probably will not be able to by definition, but it's important to understand what those unintended consequences are in advance as best we can. The equity question begs several issues of definition and so forth. And obviously the question that comes up, it is in the eye of the beholder. So equity and opportunity for whom? Agriculture, municipalities, small business, the river, Colorado taxpayers, the other members of the upper and lower basin river community. Is it equal opportunity? Is it shared pain? What's it mean? We don't know. We think that that's a topic for discussion. A very critical question is, how much are we willing to spend as a state and as taxpayers on what values for which purposes we want to support? I think, as Kyle pointed out, we probably can't support them all. So who decides? Who's the market maker? How far will it go to create a managed market? How far will we go to create a managed market? And for those of you who were over at this meeting in early March and were putting your dots on the board up there, as you may recall, that I went and took the only dot that was on there was mine on what does a managed market mean. There wasn't anybody else that wanted to talk about it that day, so I took my dot off and put it somewhere else. But what does it mean? What does it mean? And how can this evaluation of the need for continued demand management and the success or the concerns of existing programs and the nature of future plan proposals be allowed to evolve as it's required? And two people, I think Kyle mentioned this, that these things will be pilot, they will be interim for some time. And I think Ken Curtis has made a good point to us several times, is these things, we don't know what the final answers are. And we need to make sure that we adequately address the way that the answers, should there need to be answers, but the way that the answers evolve to deal with the evolving need, we need to make sure that this is involved in that discussion. And finally, a palatable, flexible, sustainable set of proposals that accommodate unknown and changing circumstances will be of critical importance to achieving enough agreement, consensus, or at least consilience on the potential proposals to achieve a politically negotiated agreement that the citizens of Colorado will tolerate or not at least actively oppose. This is fundamental to the upcoming debate. So in closing then, equity is moving beyond the enjoyable kumbaya moment that we had in early March, where we all had very close to consensus on the plethora of values that were important to us all. And I give ample credit to CWC board and the AG staff and the CWCB staff, Colorado Conservation and Conservancy districts, folks like Paul, folks like Kyle, and the rest of you that are serving on these committees, all of the CWCB task members, and the many organizations that have gotten us to this point. But the demand management conversation has to continue if we really want to solve these issues. So in closing, as a mentor of mine once said to me about a thorny political issue laden with moral implications that we were considering, she told me that people of goodwill will differ on this issue, Mark. And indeed they did. And as indeed they will on this one too. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark and Kyle. So at this point, I'm going to invite all of our panelists to come back to share your cameras again, and we'll have a full group discussion. So we're running a little bit late, but Amy prepared a couple of questions for all of the panelists, and then I'd like to invite anyone listening to also ask questions. So if you joined us late, you can type questions into the questions pane in your GoToWebinar toolbar on the side. We have a few that have come in already, but first let's jump to Amy and then we can go through your questions.
Sounds great, thanks. So my first question, looking back at the several months of work, under the demand management feasibility investigation in Colorado, I was curious to hear from people like you all who have been so intimately involved in this discussion. What has been the most illuminating or interesting thing to come to light, or that you've learned throughout this investigation, or that you've seen?
This is Mark. I'll try it. Just quickly, a couple of things, because I know we're short on time, but some of the things that we've noted, I think we've been surprised by the amount of time that ag producers, in our case, participants, the 22 farmers that we had involved, other members that were involved, the amount of time that we spent on the aesthetics and the neighborhood impacts and the social impacts, the environmental impacts of what these otherwise profitable, perhaps, demand management activities might be for us. I was surprised by that. We might not bring it up at the coffee shop necessarily, but it weighs on people's minds. How's this going to fly in my community, on my farm, with my neighbor, my uncle, Paul, your brother, etc. We were surprised by that. And part of that's driven by the fact we don't live in Blythe. We live in Colorado, and these issues have a different perspective for some of us. I think the other thing that has been, I wouldn't say it's illuminating or a surprise, but as Paul has pointed out, I think that the difficulty of trying to introduce and initiate difficult conversations that don't require us to be for or against demand management or anything else. It's been a particularly difficult thing to try to do, is to find a way, and I understand it, they're not all, there's real concerns as well as perceived concerns, but a reasonably productive and safe way to continue the conversation. It has been difficult to find. I guess that's not a surprise necessarily, but it's a fact that we have to work with. I'll stop there.
Yeah, Paul.
I'll keep it short and sweet because Mark kind of teed it up. My favorite moment in this process was to steal the phrase from Mr. Pat Wells at the demand management work group meeting on March 5th about the conversation of equity being a shared responsibility. And I think when a group of diverse stakeholders take a look at this, as far as what it means to grow food, to have viable economies, to have great urban centers, to have these things in the state, it's to all of our benefit. And I think that when we come together in that concept of shared responsibility, it's not only for us, it's also for the generations to come.
Thanks, Paul. And Kyle, do you have anything to add there?
All right. I think Caitlin muted me because I went over time. I'll make it very short. I think, again, it goes to the people. As an engineer and all of us that have been involved with water rights transactions, you give us a problem to say how much water can be conserved out of a project. The two questions we'll generally ask is how big a map do you want, and how many decimal places do you want us to take the answer to? And I think it has become very apparent that there are a lot more questions that need to be answered in these type of transactions, because it does have effect on people.
Thanks, Kyle. And I think that you really framed up or teed up my next question really well. One thing that I've really been thinking about a lot lately, as we look forward to that July report out to the CWCB board, I've been thinking about how to not only frame a lot of the discussions that have occurred to date, but also I've been thinking about what are the things we still need to figure out. What are the big issues around demand management that we haven't tackled yet, that we still need to before we make that feasibility determination. So I'd be curious about all of your thoughts on what those remaining issues may be. We can go in the same order if you'd like, or if anyone wants to jump in.
Go ahead, Kyle. You've got your arm out there.
I'll make it quick again. And Mark touched on this. I think just a couple of things. One being the market maker. Who's going to set the price? Who's going to decide who's in and who's not? That's going to be a tough, whether it's an individual, an entity, a group, however we go about it. That's a concern. The second one, we put a lot of time and effort into not only discussions, there's modeling that's been done, there's pilots that may or may not be done. And how can we ensure, or at least have some confidence that what we learn out of the discussions, the models, and the pilots will be applicable and will carry over to if and when a full-blown demand management program exists.
Thanks, Kyle. Mark or Paul?
I'm going to defer to Paul and to the rest of the people that may have questions. Amy, I kind of said my piece on the reasons for importance. Those things all need attention.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mark.
I would only add to what Kyle commented that I think there's so much opportunity right now for innovation in how we manage our water supplies across all different sectors and stakeholders. And, you know, personally, you know, tied to this project, I'm very excited to see what we can do with different crop types in agriculture and how we can keep things going.
Thanks. That's all I had. So I'll turn it back over to you, Caitlin.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. So a reminder, if you have questions, you haven't asked them already, type them into the questions panel. We have a few that have come through, and I think we have about 10 minutes left. So we'll start off with a question for Amy. It says, are all the upper basin states looking at the same demand management process in the same way as Colorado?
That's a great question. And the short answer, I think, is no. Colorado has been, I think, a real leader in the way that we've been doing our feasibility investigation. We got a bit of a head start. Other states are not taking exactly the same approach as we are. And, you know, and part of that is driven by the fact that we have a lot of very engaged, informed, very interested stakeholders and water users. So we've had that benefit. The other states, though, are beginning to look at some of these important issues, and they're doing, in some cases, I think, more targeted outreach. Really, at the end of the day, they're doing it in a way that makes sense for them, given their unique circumstances, their unique set of water users, their unique set of, frankly, state issues. So as far as the feasibility investigation goes, we're all taking a slightly different approach, but we all would have to end up in this, all the states would need to end up in a similar place as far as agreement on those key terms in the demand management storage agreement. Things like how we get the water to Lake Powell, how we account for the saved water, things like that. So I think that we're all taking slightly different approaches, but would need to end up in the same place.
All right, thanks. Another question for everyone. Can participants address the value of foregoing demand management?
You know, I guess I can just say one thing at this point is that I think it's important to keep all of our options in mind at this point. I think that, you know, as a state, we need to think about the potential hydrologic future that we could be looking at and what are the implications of that? What are the implications of a potential curtailment for the state's water users? And think about that in determining whether considering a demand management program makes sense. But beyond that, if there were a program, you know, whether or not to participate would be up to each individual. Every person who's considering it would have to think about whether it makes sense for their operation. So that has to be a personal
decision. If the question is specific more to the opportunity costs of being engaged in demand management or conserved consumptive use, there are a number of studies that are going on currently. One of them is being conducted by the Water Banking Work Group that several of us have supported to try to understand the primary and the secondary impacts of conserved consumptive use or conservation generally. So there's lots of answers to that question, and they all require some set of parameters to answer. But there's that issue is a live one and it's being pursued. If that answers the question.
Caitlin, I'm almost positive I understood the question. Could you repeat it one more time just to make sure?
I think it was, what is the benefit of foregoing demand management?
Well, when I look at this, I see opportunity right now, you know, living in an arid climate in a river system that supports 40 million people, that learning and educating about water conservation matters, and how we can keep everything else moving forward at the same time is a very worthwhile cause no matter what.
With rereading the question, I think there's something, and we've heard Paul comment on this as well as others, is that one of the things that we've seen when we first began to talk about these issues back in 2013, or when I was first began to be involved with it, I tell you, many of us had to hold our nose and say, there's no way, not no how, no way, not never. This is completely negative. There's no good can possibly come out of this. Now, there's still a lot of warts on the story, but I think one of the things that we have observed is that there's been an evolution on the part of a good deal of agriculture to try to make sure that we don't miss opportunities. Paul mentioned them earlier. I think many of our cooperators would say that the reason to do it from a personal perspective is because it's to add agricultural profitability. I mean, there's a self-serving mercenary part to this. We want to do all we can for the common good, but we can't do that if we don't find a way to support farms and ranches. So there are reasons economically. There's reasons to incorporate rotational conserved consumptive use into farm operations in order to make money. Now, some of the other issues is that we feel here that we're not going to always negotiate from a position of strength with municipalities wherever they reside, that the demands on the river may not come from ways other than simply we have bad hydrology. So the benefits of learning these things now and foregoing the use of that water for its traditional purposes has a number of layers of benefit. Paul mentioned those, Kyle mentioned those, and I know I've heard you talk about them as well, Amy. And the growing realization that we have to balance pros and cons here, whether we like it or not, I think is, it varies case to case. They're local, but they exist, and there's good reasons to consider them, we believe.
Right, thank you. Another question, maybe for Amy. What is the status of funding for demand management given COVID, the loss of severance taxes, and limited sports betting revenue?
That's a great question, and it's something that we are getting asked a lot these days. You know, I think that as with many issues, the future is uncertain right now. The future as far as funding goes, as far as what we're going to be able to do and not be able to do is an open question, and we're still trying to figure that all out at the state. What I can say is that for better or worse, our work groups have done a great job at adapting to the virtual platform. So we've actually saved a lot of money on meetings, on not having those in-person meetings and workshops. So we're really happy that we've been able to save some money there. But going forward, of course, we're going to have to give some thought about how we do this differently. There's been a lot of talk about potential pilot projects, for example, or a fund for pilot projects. And that's something that, you know, is certainly more questionable than it may have been before. But I guess from my perspective, there are still a lot of important issues out there and a lot of important questions that will benefit from just having people talk about them. So I believe that we still have a lot of work to do and a lot of work that we will be able to do at minimal expense.
Okay, see if we can get through one or two more questions. Someone says, my concern is urgency. We're watching a virus of water shortage about to blow up and we aren't responding swiftly enough. Lake Powell will lose another 15 to 20 feet this year. Climate science tells us things will get worse. Why can't we start implementing demand management now and learn/adapt as we go? Lots of farmers want to get going.
Mark, do you want to, you go.
That's a policy issue I'm not going to touch. Amy, knock yourself out.
You know, that's anything that we do at a state level, anything that we do at an upper basin level, we need to make sure that we are fully advised when we're taking those actions and making those decisions. And I've heard that from plenty of people that, you know, it's time, we should get this set up, we should get this figured out. And that's why we're doing the hard work of figuring out if we can. But you know, we've heard a lot of concerns as well. We've heard a lot of people concerned about the potential negative implications of demand management or impacts on communities. I think there are a lot of people who believe that those are issues that can be worked through, that they can be figured out, that we can figure out how to either avoid entirely or mitigate potential adverse impacts. But it's an issue. It's something that we need to think through before we rush into setting up a program. And the other part of this to remember is that the other 3 upper division states also have to make the determination that demand management is feasible before we can get there. So even if Colorado tomorrow were to say it's feasible for us, we don't get that storage pool in Lake Powell. We don't get that protected water unless and until the other states get to the same place. So it's partly working through the hard issues, and it's partly a waiting game.
All right, thanks. So we have a few more questions, but we're out of time. So I think I'm going to email all of you panelists with those questions. We'll see if we can get some answers, and we'll send those out along with the recording of the webinar, hopefully on Monday or early next week. So thank you all so much for your time speaking as panelists. Thanks for everyone in attendance for being here with us. And we'll follow up early next week.
Very good. So long.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. That concludes our webinar.
Thanks so much.